What's up, guys? First and foremost, I want you guys to know that I just went in the mirror and I checked to see if I have any eye boogers. That is how much you guys mean to me. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we are doing chapter 3, I believe. Chapter 3, version 3, edition 3, something 3 of Q&A questions. So for anybody new here, if you guys want a question answered, what you need to do is get down in the comments section, leave a question below, and then as you guys are looking through those questions, give a little thumbs up to ones that you want to see the answers to as well, because that's how I've chosen these. You guys left me 100-something questions, and I'm picking basically the top 10-ish that had the most thumbs up, meaning the most people want to hear the answer of it. So that's what you need to do. Got a good question, leave it down in the comments below. And again, look through what everybody else has got. And if you want to find out something, give that thumbs up, because that's how I'm picking every single time. So right into it. The first one here is, this is a good one. It's actually, I had a video before where I said, what are my most overrated exercises? Somebody asked me that. And this person said, what are your 3 most underrated exercises? So in typical Joe fashion, spoiler alert, I'm not going to list 3 exact exercises because if you guys have followed along for a while, you don't need anything. There's not a single exercise anyone needs. And again, that's without a doubt. Even if I say, hey, this is my favorite exercise for this, there's always a variation that might fit someone better because of their structure, because of an injury, because of how they perform on it, whatever. So for that reason, there's never going to be something specific like, oh, you have to do this. But I'm going to give kind of categories of exercises that I think are very underrated. So good questions. Why I'm answering this one first. Ryan, good question. So number one, I'm going to think is exercises with good profiles, and particularly exercises that stack. And these become more and more important for advanced lifters. And so what I mean by that, that best example is squat patterns. So if you're doing some sort of squat pattern and your goal is to put on as much muscle as possible for as long as possible, so make sure you listen to that. I think doing that with some sort of accommodating resistance is kind of a game changer. And so again, if you understand how stacking works. There's a line of force from the exercise. That line of force can stack with joints. And there's the positions on exercises, squats being the best example, where the top's really easy. And again, in case you're new here, the simple version on that is, think about if I made you squat 405, at the top 6 inches or the bottom 6 inches of the squat, which one's harder? And that's how everyone has a basic understanding of there's portions of exercises because of how that line of force stacks with joints. They're very easy or very hard. So when everyone actually squats properly with a free weight or without accommodating resistance, you're basically just squatting to the bottom of that movement. That's what's the limiting factor for you, is how much you can do at the bottom of the squat. And for the most part, if you're doing the bottom properly, you're owning it, you're really under training the top. So by using some sort of bands or chains on a free weight squat, on a hack squat, on something like a pendulum squat, which basically has a built-in good profile, those, in my opinion, give a huge opportunity for progression, and they're also massive for efficiency. So again, for newer lifters, I think there's absolutely something to, you should just learn how to squat first. You should learn how to do a hack first. Every exercise to a certain extent is a skill or a sport. So learn how to do that skill, learn how to do that sport first. But the further along you get in your journey, where you realize all this stuff is coming to points of diminishing returns. If you're new, you haven't realized that. You've been doing this for 10 years, working really hard. You've definitely realized that. And so because everything comes to a point of diminishing returns, you have to get that more on top of all of your stuff to keep making progress. And that's everything. So that's whether all your commitment outside the gym, sleep, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. Inside the gym, of course, it's how hard you train, how properly you train, but exercise selection is a big thing on that too. So using bands and chains and things properly on especially those things that have stacking patterns, again, which is squatting, leg press type things, and in reverse, rowing type motions. So that's one of the few things, rowing, pull downs, rowing more than anything. That's a big place for good machines, in my opinion. For the same thing, basically, if you do a rowing motion, it is the hardest at the top, kind of the opposite way around, and the easiest at the bottom. So most of the time, if you're doing a proper row, bent over barbell row or whatever, T-bar row, great exercises, not knocking them. If you're doing them properly and actually using the muscles at the top, then you're under training the bottom. You could be using more weight there. Your body could tolerate more weight there. And that's why a lot of people kind of inherently know that with good old school equipment. People love like Nautilus, like carrying and stuff like that, especially for back pieces. Really, really important, because that's how those cams and stuff were set up to match what your body can do. And so again, all those free weight rowing exercises and stuff I said are good, but it's really just a matter of efficiency. I think it becomes more important to do that, again, as you get further and further along in your journey. The other 2 I'm going to say is cables, particularly for tricep stuff. And so cable tricep exercises, this is one there's this little bit of a stigma, of course, between you have to do free weights, you have to do barbells, you have to do dumbbells, they're better. It's purely for kind of semantic reasons, meaning, how the alignment of free weight exercises works for tricep stuff. It just makes it very, very tough to line up for larger individuals. And so again, this isn't just based on the fact that I've probably got 15 years worth of logbooks doing skull crushers, doing overhead extensions with straight bars, easy bars, dumbbells, and wrecking my elbows from it, but also working with a huge population of advanced lifters. And I've seen people make more progress switching from free weight to tricep exercises, more progress, not just meaning healthier elbow joints, but bigger triceps, switching from those free weight exercises that may have fit at some point in time, but as people get bigger and bigger and bigger and have a harder time fitting into them, lose it over time or lose the ability to make them fit. So I think, again, the more advanced, the larger you are, cable tricep exercises are very, very underrated. And again, not just for, this joint health type thing, but also for the ability to actually make progress. And the last one's going to be single arm exercises. That's really big for biceps more than anything else. Again, it's a little bit of kind of a semantic thing, but for the same reason. A lot of people feel like these are the things you have to kind of build this base with. I have to do barbell stuff first. I have to do dumbbell stuff first. And, they can fit some people. They can even fit some larger people. But again, from my experience, they don't fit a whole lot of larger individuals. And at some point in time, if that load's not getting through the joint properly, again, not only is it not great for the joint, it's not going to get to the muscle as well either. So again, those, the first one, the squat pattern, the rowing patterns, very, very good for a matter of efficiency. And then again, cables for triceps, single arm stuff for biceps, good for progress. Again, actually getting tension to the muscle, but also huge for joint health and longevity. So those are my 3 categories of underrated stuff. Greg's got a question here. Next one basically saying, is it better to kind of smoke one muscle or to basically move back and forth? And his example was, would you go from a hack squat right into a leg extension or an RDL right into a leg curl, completely smoke the quads or completely smoke the hams? Or would it be better to do, I'm guessing, like kind of alternating? So you go all your big movements. So I guess a squat, and then your RDL, and then back to your leg extension, then back to whatever. I would say from a pure nerd standpoint, you're going to have more mechanical tension opportunity from alternating them, but you're going to have more kind of metabolic stimulus if you go right from one right into the other. And again, knowing that that's probably the biggest difference between those two, what's the actual answer for a normal person saying, okay, well, that doesn't help. Which one should I do? Personally, if I had to go with one or the other, I would say, honestly, alternating exercises is better. People like to have the feeling of I'm getting as pumped as I possibly can, which there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And you might feel like your quads are more pumped going from hack to a leg extension immediately as opposed to alternating. But I think whatever allows the opportunity for a higher level of performance, meaning load, form, basically on a given movement, is going to have the best dividends or best return as far as results are concerned. So meaning if you went right from a hack right into a leg extension, I think your overall numbers and performance with all that fatigue already on the leg extension would be lower than if you just did them separate. So again, alternating going to a ham and then going to a leg extension later. But there is an individual component here. So reality is this type of stuff, I always say, you should find out a little bit on your own. And there could be reasons depending on your recovery, depending on your diet, where maybe you might favor more mechanical tension, might favor more metabolic stimulus. But really, whatever you individually, what you like to do is important. People don't really talk about that enough because if you like something, odds are you'll perform better on it. And then that's kind of the bigger thing is whatever you perform best on from a quantitative standpoint. So if you actually do a logbook like you should and see what do you progress better, which method do you progress better on, that's the one you should go with. And again, in my opinion, personal experience, going with an alternating there is going to give you a higher level of performance. And again, performance as well, too, when you're dealing with fatigue coming from a hack to a leg extension, not that a leg extension is that complicated from a form standpoint, but being a little bit more fresh. Not only do you think you have better ability to tolerate higher loads and better performance from a pure number standpoint, it's easier to have good form, good control when you're not dealing with all that shit coming right off the hack. So again, like a lot of my answers, one's not definitively better than the other. That's on paper what I would favor that way, but it really is important, what you prefer as well too, and what you perform best on. Next question is, how often do I deload? Do I do this strategically to allow for more recovery? What do I deload? How do I do volume, intensity, weight, whatever? This is from Chris. So I always say deloads aren't a necessity for everyone. I call it a recovery phase because technically I devolume. So again, if you're actually someone that has high levels of load all the time, power lifters, Olympic lifters, something like that, then I think it's very important to lower loads at some point in time. But if you're working more where most of your issues are probably coming from a recovery standpoint, most of your issues are coming from volume more so than it is from those high level of loads, like is the case for hypertrophy, for bodybuilding, then devoluming is going to be a better thing to do in a recovery phase. So first off, not everyone ever needs a recovery phase. Because if you think about what goes into recovery, there's these short-term things, looking at what happens on a day in a micro cycle, and then macro, what affects that. Like how is your sleep all the time? How is your nutrition all the time? And just hypothetically, if someone's recovery based on they're just doing okay with their nutrition, their sleep is a 4 out of 10, and they're still trying to perform as well as they can, and someone else is doing a 9 out of 10, why would both those people need the same amount or the same frequency of a recovery phase? They won't, because again, the person that basically is 9 out of 10 is going to probably need less often as far as a recovery phase or a deload phase or a devolume phase, just because their recovery is better all the time because of everything that they're doing. Then you can make the argument if their recovery is that good, is their training going to be a higher level of output, in which case they could still need a recovery phase at some point. But that's the thing you have to look at as well too. So again, it's the point of doing a recovery phase is you have some sort of systemic effect that you're not fully recovery from. So there's obviously just what happened this given day, this given workout, and the ideas of this builds cumulatively over time that you're like, okay, now we need a couple weeks for my body to just completely recover with that. So again, on an individual thing, if someone's just dealing with their stress from individual days better than someone else, they're not going to need it as often as some people. As a general rule of thumb for people that actually train hard, so you can have an actual time frame to it, maybe every 10 to 12 weeks is a decent amount of time to have a recovery phase. The first thing I always drastically reduce is volume. So normally, I like to be more aggressive, so I'd rather have maybe 2 or 3 weeks tops of a recovery phase. I will cut the volume sometimes. Basically, I will cut it to a third to a quarter of what it was. So literally 3 or 4 times less working effective volume than it was before. Lots of times that's enough. If I need to reduce volume more, or reduce, basically it is volume more, is I will stay short of failure. So the next thing, a variable that I do, is I will stay a little bit 1 or 2 reps short of failure, realizing that effective reps, the ones that are closest to failure, are the ones that are going to require the most recovery. If I'm staying a little short of failure, that's actually another way to lower volume, but people just look at it as reps in reserve. So those are the first thing I do. Number 1, lower volume. Number 2, if I need to, for someone to recover better, stay a little bit short of failure, so leave 1, 2 reps in reserve. And I rarely lower weight. So if somebody, that's, I think, one of the biggest mistakes when people do a recovery phase, especially in the bodybuilding world, people just go in and they train light and they pump stuff around. It's like lots of times when you're pumping stuff around, your volume could actually still be relatively high. You're still creating a lot of inflammation. You're lowering the weights that you're using so much that you're actually probably losing tissue. So especially for natties, I think it's actually more important to keep your weights heavier when you're doing a recovery phase, and actually just mix up or use all the other variables, like I said, volume, reps in reserve, to help your body recovery while still holding on to tissue during those phases. Significant difference between tricep activation between a pronated and a supinated grip. The short answer is no. People have answered this a whole lot before, so I don't think I'm going to provide any new information here. Triceps attached to the ulnar. When you do this pronation, supination, that's your radius rotating over top of your ulnar, which again doesn't make sense. Basically, the muscle we're talking about doesn't move. I can do this all day, and that tricep just sits there existing in space with no difference in transfer and load, no difference in length. So from a pure activation standpoint, it's not going to make a difference. The reason some people, I think, feel a difference, some people will swear, when I do this grip, I just feel it better. And so this is, hopefully I can provide a slightly different answer on this. One, some people just train, they can't help themselves. They just I have to train heavy. I need to train heavy and progressive, not realizing their form is going to complete shit. They might not even feel the trained muscle. So some guys doing the stack, with a really shitty form like this, doing this, pronated grip press down with, whatever weights, it's a whole body exercise. And one day someone's like, oh, bro, you got to try it underhand grip. So he goes underhand grip, finds out just because he has an underhand grip and load is going to be limited by that grip in and of itself, he goes lighter. And now it's like, oh man, this feels great. I'm squeezing. And it might not actually have anything to do with the grip. It might have everything to do with the fact that he's actually going lighter. He or she is going lighter for the first time. And it's like, holy cow, now I can actually feel that tricep. And they attribute it to the grip position change and not the fact that they're actually using half the load and maybe actually using the tricep for a change and not every other muscle group. And the other reason being is, when I was demonstrating, if the cable is basically completely vertical, the problem with a pronated grip is it tends to do exactly what you can see here. As I pronate, that elbow flares. If this upper arm and elbow is not in a great line with that cable, it can actually be a little bit tough on the elbow joint. You're not putting force right through that elbow joint as a hinge joint as you might want it. So when people supinate, what it does is you can see what this does to the elbow. It helps me pull that elbow in, gets my upper arm more vertical, and in turn is going to line up better with that cable. So people will switch grip, change their upper arm position as a result of where they have to go lighter, and it will feel better. So you have people swear by, well, when I do it, I feel a difference. It's like, well, the things that you may have changed this, but you're not paying attention to the fact that you cut the load in half and you changed your upper arm position to do lighter. So someone had answered in the comments here, that's why I love a neutral grip. So neutral grip is my favorite way to do press downs because I can go in this neutral grip and it doesn't make me want to flare out like you could have with a fully pronated grip, but you're also not going to be limited by strength doing this. So I'd much rather hold onto a rope, or you've seen me, I love the cuff is my favorite because I can get that cuff loaded right on the outside of my hand and still squeeze it tight, and I can have everything line up perfectly, and I can still go heavy because going heavy is important as long as your form isn't going to garbage. Someone asked, how would you incorporate, I'm not 100% sure, but a lot of people want to know this, how would you incorporate leg press, a hack, a Smith, leg press, and routine if you want a bit of variety? So if the goal is variety, I would just have a leg A day and a leg B day and basically just sub out the exercises that have the same goal. This person said basically leg press to focus on quads or hack to focus on glutes. I would do it the other way around. Hack is a much better quad exercise. Leg press in general can be a much better glute exercise, although you can do it for both. And so I would say, okay, well, if I want to do a hack and a Smith, I'm assuming the hack obviously do a squat pattern and the Smith machine to do a squat pattern. I would do a squat pattern with a hack on my leg A day, and on my leg B day, I would rotate to the Smith for the squat pattern. If I want to do something more similar, again, the only things they do here are example for a leg press, but if I wanted something maybe more hip dominant on one day, I could do a hip dominant leg press on one day, and on the other day, I could do an RDL variation. Those aren't exactly perfect subs, but you could do things like that. I always look at what is the exercise pattern, what is the goal of it, and you can just rotate different exercises on different days. And I think that's actually can be a good way to preserve a little bit of orthopedic health, can sometimes be easier on the joints. And then also, again, if you like variety in your training, having A, B days for any body part. So a lot of people do push, pull, lower, and a great split I think could be push, pull, lower A, push, pull, lower B. And that's a way that you can have some variety if you really feel the need for different angles. But again, aside from variety is not bad as long as that's what your goal is. But again, from an actual progress standpoint, that can allow for some variety, but also still give you some consistent things to come back to, because that's the only issue with constantly rotating exercises. If you constantly rotate things just for the sake of variety, you don't really have a benchmark to gauge progress with. And again, if your only goal is variety, then have at it. Go and mix stuff up all the time. But if you still want to make progress and have variety, that's, I think, a great purpose for the AB day. Someone said, how do you feel about, if you have a separate arm day, how do you feel about supersetting triceps, biceps? Is there any benefit or negative return to that? In theory, and I'll say this with my current arm day, whatever is earliest in the workout is always going to have a little bit of priority. So I just was doing myself and Terrence's arm day, and because I wanted triceps a bit of a priority, I was like, well, let's just do all triceps and then all biceps, and I've done both. And every time I do that, I just get pissed off because it takes longer. So I always superset, because anytime I've even tried to go just straight sets of one and then the other, it ends up just pissing me off for taking so long. So my preferred is supersets, and from a lot of experience of log booking both ways, I find that you don't actually have any decrease in performance on one or the other. So again, from supersetting a bicep and a tricep, because they're not big body parts, when I'm actually log booking, tracking, and seeing my progress, I make just as good progress, pretty much both ways. So my preferred way is always to superset it. And again, the individual thing does matter. Whatever you like doing better, you can always go for that, because they both work perfectly fine, doing all one and then all the other, or supersetting. But just from a time standpoint and the fact that there's no dip in performance, I prefer doing supersets. Someone asked, how often should you switch variations on main lifts? So there's two things I consider here. Number one is alignment. So if you have something that feels great, if you have an exercise, this is your 10 out of 10 exercise based on alignment, it feels great. I feel it right in the train muscle, zero joint discomfort. Then the more you have an exercise that fits that description, the less often you should rotate it, right? Because anything else is like, oh, if you have this idea, I just have to rotate my big lifts, and you rotate from something that feels great to anything less than amazing, then it's like, why am I rotating to something crappier that's not as good on my joints? I don't feel as well on my muscles. So I always say that if you have something that feels great, ride it till the wheels fall off. I'll have some movements that I literally keep in 11 months of the year, right? And just maybe every once in a while rotate it. So if alignment is on point, your need to rotate is very, very low. The worse your alignment is, and I'll use an example, it doesn't have to be bad, but like for Terrence, for example, we have to be pressing stuff is probably one of the only things that every once in a while we'll find a spot where something doesn't feel as good. So just out of, we might as well, because there's so many good exercises that accomplish the same goal, we'll rotate, pressing movements every 3 months or so. And that's just because, none of them feel like a 10 out of 10. They all feel like an 8 out of 10. So we still only pick things that feel good. But because of basically preserving orthopedic health, joint health, we will rotate things every 3 months or so. So one is alignment. The worse basically an exercise or a body part or a type of exercise feels, the more often you should rotate. The better it feels, the less often you should rotate. And then the next variable is performance. So I think it is good if you give something a run into the ground for a few months straight, I'd say 3 or 4 months minimum, and you're not making progress, and you check the boxes for everything else first, where it's like, well, my recovery is good, my sleep's good, my food's good, and I'm still not making progress, then that can be a good reason to rotate once you've actually run into the ground. Some people will do an exercise 2 or 3 weeks in a row and they'll stall and they're like, oh, I got to switch. And it's like the longer you're doing this, 2 or 3 weeks of not making big changes in weight or numbers is not stalling. That's called things get closer to points of diminishing returns, and basically you just see returns smaller as you go along. So next one, question about basically training very early in the morning. Don't have time to eat. Basically, I had this question all the time. So, is there a detriment to not eating before you train early in the morning? The short answer is no. In my opinion, well, not in my opinion, the reality as far as carbs are concerned, the main thing that you're using when you're training is glycogen. So stored glycogen in the muscle. And I don't quote me on this, but some nutrition nerd can probably tell, from smarter nutrition nerds than me, I think it takes 5 to 6 hours for basically like a carbohydrate that you ingest to actually get turned into muscle glycogen. So yes, you can eat some carbs before you train, and you will use some glucose, some blood sugar, so that'll turn into blood sugar depending on the type of carb pretty quick. You can use some of that as energy when you train, but the main form of energy will be glycogen. So if you're training first thing in the morning, if you ate a meal an hour beforehand, you're not using that as muscle glycogen anyway. The days eating beforehand will arguably have a larger impact on your training first thing in the morning. So as long as your nutrition is on point consistently, throughout the day and day after day, week after week, then overall it won't make a big difference. That being said, this is still an individual thing. So I always have lots of conversations with people about this stuff and make sure they try things. So I think an intra-workout can be good here because, like I said, you will use glucose. You can use some amino acids that are basically getting right into your, into your blood. So basically that could be things in the forms of quick digesting carbs, that could be essential amino acids, and those are things that I think have a great place as far as intra-workout stuff type stuff goes. So if you do get up, train first thing in the morning and don't eat, and you're concerned about not having enough blood sugar, not enough amino acids in the blood, then just go intra-workout. But you can still mess around with small meals. Some people really feel a difference if they have some carbs beforehand, and that could be the fact that they are maybe using a higher percentage of blood glucose from training. So you could always mess around with not traditional meals beforehand as well too. Everyone's like, I got to eat 10 ounces of chicken, I got to eat all this carbs or whatever. You could have a meal that's just 20 grams of carbs, and you could have a meal that's 30 or 40 grams, or 20 grams of carbs or 20 grams of protein, like a smaller meal, and not this massive meal beforehand, and see how that goes. But I've trained fasted a bunch. I've had a lot of people train fasted a bunch, and really the main test is your performance. So if you're still able to logbook performance, make progress session to session, long-term put on lean tissue, then that's the answer that it's not a big deal. Are all intensifiers created equal, or do you prefer drop sets, rest pause, cluster? So first and foremost, most of the time, rest pause and cluster are pretty much interchangeable. And I don't think one's better than the other. They're just going to have a different effect. So rest pause and clusters are going to allow for a higher level of load to be used and sustained for a longer period of time. And that is important. So load is a part of things as far as intramuscular force, and so is proximity to failure. So I think all our things being the same, if you can have proximity to failure and heavy loads, I think that is probably the most important thing for hypertrophy. And you can still have results, though, again, later on in the workout training close to failure, but that's why I think you want to prioritize loads and stuff first. So the place where things like clusters and drop sets will be more important, clusters and rest pause will be more important, will be places like where someone doesn't have a spotter. They can't train as close to failure as often by themselves. So for them, for working stuff, for things you track in logbook, I think things like cluster and rest pause can be very valuable. Where things like drop sets, supersets are more metabolic stimulus. They're more dense work. And I think they have more of a place towards the end of a workout. So if I want to accumulate a lot of things close to failure in a short period of time where I know that load is not going to be a part of that driving factor, then drop sets and those types of intensifiers can have a place. So personally, if I have a spotter, I don't use clusters and rest pause as often. But again, if you don't have a spotter, that's a very valuable tool, how to manage your meat and potatoes, big logbook things. Whereas for everyone else, I think drop sets can have more of a place towards the end of the workout, again, where maybe density is the goal, close proximity to the failure is the goal, where load is not the main driver. And last question, I get this one all the time. What is a good bodybuilding split for natural lifters? The natural enhanced thing has almost nothing to do with it. Again, yes, I'm not saying that being enhanced doesn't make a massive difference for your results. Of course it does. It will have everything happen way faster for the same person natty, the same person enhanced. You'll have progress way faster being enhanced. Your ceiling for how much lean tissue you can put on will be enhanced. How lean you can stay and hold on to tissue will be enhanced. So yes, it makes a big difference. But as far as the split, it makes little to no difference because most androgens that you're going to use or most anabolic substances, they will improve your performance in the gym and they will improve your recovery. So it really kind of all works out as a wash for the most part anyway. The thing that you should be determined maybe with your split is basically just training age. When someone doesn't need as much volume per body part on a given workout, that's where it might make sense if you're a beginner to start more with a total body or a half body and then progress maybe to a push-pull or a bro split. And again, that's just on paper. You could make a strong argument for that type of split for someone that's beginner and then progressing more towards a push-pull variation as you get more advanced. But even that's a wash in my opinion. It really comes down to whatever splits you like doing will probably be the one you will perform the best on. And then whichever one you can show progress with is going to be your best split. I have known hundreds, if not thousands of people that right from the beginner stages did a bro split and they make good progress that way. I've known people start with full body and they make good progress that way. Like I said, if you don't care and you're just like, tell me what to do, fine. If you're a beginner, do a full body, do a half body. And then, after a few years of doing that, progress into a more, specific split. But if you have a preference, that's the split that you should use. Because to a certain degree, even from a nerd standpoint, volume is kind of a wash when you just look over it over the course of a week. Meaning if somebody basically trains X amount of working sets per one workout a week, or does that same amount spread over 3 times a week, again, most research stuff shows it's kind of a wash. It just really it depends on how you prefer to do it. Again, maybe with the exception of the most beginner. So that's the questions. Good questions this time, guys. Again, if you missed it in the beginning or now after hearing all those questions answered, you have a question yourself, leave them down below in the comments section. If you see a question that you want to have answered as well, too, give it that little thumbs up deal. And don't forget to do all the YouTube stuff, which I'm supposed to say in the beginning. I ruined it. I ruined YouTube. I've done it wrong. I failed. Like, subscribe, share. What did I do? Yeah, no one's going to see it now. Terrence just told me I failed at YouTube. No one's going to share it. No one's going to like or subscribe. And I'm not going to have any validation of self-worth from strangers in the number or count of subscribers that I have. So this is my last YouTube video ever. Just kidding. Like, subscribe, share with some friends. And again, we will do another Q&A if you guys leave me some good questions down below later. And I'm back.